83A1-3-B2, and 83A1-3-3 from Residential 1, R1, to Residential 3, R3, pursuant to Cape Charles Zoning Ordinance Section 2.7.2 and Section 3.3. The legal advertisement that was published in the paper says zoning text amendment ZTA 2025-01 application for the town of Cape Charles to amend Article 3, Section 3.3, Bolegs E of the Cape Charles zoning ordinance by deleting the provision requiring a 3-acre lot minimum for a multifamily project development. Staff will present a summation of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This comes about from a complicated situation that triggered this, which was the Seabreeze Apartments, but it also then highlighted some oversights that we made when we were doing the rezoning back in the fall. And so that's really what I want to focus on right now. As I mentioned, this came about as a result of conversations with a prospective purchaser of the Seabreeze Apartments, which is a parcel just under 1.5 acres, and it is currently zoned R1. As I've been working with those developers and property owners looking at the Seabreeze Apartments, we felt that might be something for consideration to rezone it to address several other issues occurring on that property with a substantial amount of legal nonconforming designation on that property in the R1 zoning district. So as I started to look at our zoning ordinance to see what might be an applicable zoning designation for the Seabreeze Apartments, I really focused in on the R3, which is our multifamily district property, meant for multiple types of tenants or vacancies or residencies occurring on that property. In our R3, we have a minimum 3-acre requirement for that zoning district for multifamily project development. So when I look further to see what other parcels actually had been zoned R3, we had rezoned several parcels to an R3 designation in December when we adopted the revised zoning map. Specifically, they are parcels all along the old Cape Charles Road, and I've enclosed a map in your staff report, and we also brought the town map, the town zoning map, for the public to see. The parcels in question that currently have the R3 zoning sit over here as you come out of town, come out of the county, the town into the county off of Old Cape Charles Road. And in addition, it also includes the large parcel that is owned by the town of Cape Charles, which I think there's been conversations from council for that to eventually be a site or consideration for some sort of multifamily housing development to address some of our housing needs in our community. When you utilize all the setback requirements that are contained in the R3 zoning ordinance, such as both the setbacks from the front, the rear, the sides, as well as all the other provisions, when you do have multifamily development that we have listed in our ordinance, as well as everything else you have to include in a site plan development, including parking, driveways, sidewalks, landscaping, and stormwater. When you put all that onto a site plan, that really will determine how much land is necessary to accommodate a multifamily project, which could be as small as 2 apartment buildings in some of our considerations with 2 or 3 units within those apartment buildings, or it could be a larger scale development of, say, 8 buildings with 4 to 8 apartments within those buildings. So it depends on what size of the development would really drive the need of how much land needs to encompass that property. So I don't feel an acreage requirement is really necessary to achieve what the town is trying to do with trying to diversify our housing stock to give some of these multifamily housing considerations out there in the various parcels we've identified would be appropriate. So I do feel it is highly restrictive of retaining the 3-acre requirement, in particular for those parcels that are in that R3 zoning, because only one of them actually meets that qualification today, and that is the town parcel. None of the other ones do. So I went to town council through our town manager, and they did agree to advance a zoning text amendment to amend our zoning ordinance of Article 3, Section 3.3E to remove the 3-acre minimum land requirement. Again, that does not mean the town council has blessed it. They just initiated the process that's required by the Code of Virginia and our ordinance through a resolution of intent to send this to public hearing and determine if that's something they should consider. As I'm walking through, I just want to make sure I've hit everything that is critical to here. I did give you the list of it. I have not talked, granted, every property owner that's on this list received notification of this hearing. I spoke with 2 of them, most recently when this notice went out to them, but I had spoken to several right after December, so somewhere in the month of January. I talked with them about what the change meant for their property and development. So there's one of these properties that is a vacant lot, and that is Spath Squared LLC, and that's number, the Z1 at the very far edge, 90-12Z. That is probably the one that has had the most interest in this because he is seeking at some point to do something on that property. And so, yes, I did in particular reach out to him to make him aware of that. The other parcels all have structures on them with the exception of 90-29-1. It does not have a parcel. It does have an approved site plan for one more apartment building, similar to the other 3 apartment buildings that have already been constructed over there. And then, of course, the town, as I mentioned, owns the largest block over here, and that's just over 16 acres. And the town manager's here, and he can speak to the town's position on this proposed rezoning as well. I did want to also review with you how this is addressed in our comprehensive plan. We do talk about housing quite a bit in our comprehensive plan and the desire and need to have some diversified housing stock, and that really was one of the driving forces of looking at the land designation of R3. And so I have provided you that information from the comprehensive plan. So with that, I will stop at this point and offer the floor to our town manager as the representative for the applicant.
Thank you.
Good evening. I really can't improve upon that staff report, but I'm available to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you. Public comments. Do we have any public comments? No, just a second. We signed up here.
No one has actually signed up. Yes. Does anyone else wish to sign up before I walk away with the sign-up sheet for both public hearings?
So I will read the rules for public comments. All in-person comments shall keep their remarks to no more than 3 minutes. Speakers will be advised when their 3 minutes have been concluded. Speakers shall speak clearly into the microphone to ensure that their name and address are heard and recorded as part of the record of the meeting. Speakers shall address remarks only to the commission and not to the audience. Members of the commission will not respond to questions posed nor address or rebut speakers' statements made during the public hearing. Finally, speakers shall refrain from both actions and language that would interrupt the proceedings. So Peter Alpin.
Hi, thank you very much for having me tonight. I've never done this before, so you have to forgive me. I'm a little nervous. My wife Elizabeth and I own the house at 3 Bay Vista in the Bay Vista planned unit development in Cape Charles, which is immediately adjacent to the Seabreeze Apartments. In 1992, and again twice last fall, the Cape Charles zoning rules were ratified, requiring R3 parcels to sit on no less than 3 acres of land to avoid overcrowding and resource scarcities. The planning department is looking to remove the 3-acre requirement of R3 properties to facilitate the proposed buyer of the 1.5-acre Seabreeze parcel who would like its zoning changed from R1 to R3, and evidently the planning department is also making outbound phone calls to other parcel holders. The planning department's agenda on March 20th, as prepared by Katie Nunez and reviewed by John Hosey, noted that the thought of changing the R3 zoning to no longer require a minimum of 3 acres was originated from a conversation with a single developer who would like to fix and flip the existing unsalvageable Seabreeze apartment buildings. If approved, the entire town of Cape Charles must deal with this change to the zoning rule, putting all single-family homes at risk to their next-door properties being rezoned for multifamily property like the one next to me is. Why would the town planning department change a zoning requirement for the entire town at the request of one business person? If the 3-acre requirement for R3 parcels is an important requirement for the town, why wasn't it taken up at either zoning amendment review last fall? The fixing and flipping of the Seabreeze apartments will benefit the builder only, but removing the 3-acre minimum for R3 zoned properties will hurt everyone in this town. I respectfully request that the planning department retain the 3-acre requirement for R3 zoned properties in Cape Charles to relieve overcrowding and resource scarcity. Please do not let one profit-motivated developer put the entire town's investments at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's no more,
No, we have no other written comment that has come in on this item. No one else has signed up to speak.
okay, do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? All right. So we have the second. Let me reread that again. Zoning map amendment, ZMA 2025-01, application from Seabreeze Associates LP to conditionally rezone with proffers 201 through 209 Washington Avenue, tax map number 83A1-3-B2 and 83A1-3-3 from residential 1 R1 to residential 3 R3 pursuant to Cape Charles zoning ordinance section 2.7.2 and section 3.3.
With the board's indulgence, I think knowing the background of this property is important, so I do want to talk about that for just a minute, if I may, as part of this application. This property was developed in 1984 with a total of 4 buildings that house the apartments, a total of 28 apartments, and we have provided that breakdown for you in that staff report. There's also an office building / laundry room that's present on the property as well. This was done when the town did not have zoning. The town did not actually adopt its zoning ordinance until 1992. And when they did adopt their zoning ordinance, they did give every parcel a zoning designation. And for the Seabreeze apartments, I would presume the reason the zoning designation that was provided to it, which is R1, was done out of more convenience than actual study of how that fit within the zoning ordinance itself. Because all around it is R1 zoning. It is definitely the main part of the residential area of the historic district is all R1 zoning until you get over towards Mason Avenue, and that's when you start to have C1 zoning and various designations of C zoning as you move your way up Mason Avenue. Keep in mind, when they did the R1 zoning, that was never intended for multifamily dwelling. However, one of the things that the law provides for is when you do bring on zoning and you have conflicting uses or uses that are not allowed under that zoning ordinance, but they were in existence before you had zoning, they get, I guess the common term is grandfathered in, or the legal term is legal nonconforming uses. And Seabreeze was a legal nonconforming use in the R1 zoning district and can continue and did continue for many years as such without any further disruption of their own activities under our zoning ordinance because they had that protection under the law. Recent things made certain changes occur at the Seabreeze apartments that brought this somewhat to a head. In February of 2024, the town issued a notice of violation regarding the two northern buildings on the property, that they were then found to be unfit for human habitation, and the town worked with, at that point, the property owner and manager, and USDA and HUD, who were funders into that property, both from a mortgage perspective, and were underwriting the lease payments for most of those tenants in the Seabreeze Apartments. And we worked to relocate all of the tenants that were in the two northern buildings from that property that same evening that we issued that notice of violation. With that said, we then put out an order to the property owner that certain improvements had to be made or studies had to be made to determine the level of improvements to bring it back to an area of being fit again for human habitation. One of the things under the legal nonconforming statute is if you stop having the use of that property for that purpose it was being used for, both the buildings and the use itself, then after 2 years that use naturally expires and it goes away. One of the clocks that got accelerated is when the town issued the notice of violation requiring certain improvements be made and repairs made to the property, to those two buildings. That actually accelerated a clock under the code, and that put it to a 12-month calendar or a 1-year calendar to address those violations, bring the property back into compliance, and be back to a structurally okay building again, or else that legal nonconforming use would go away. There were other background issues occurring on this property that really brought this to a head, not just from where the town stepped in, but even prior that led to having the town step in. And we do have representation here on behalf of the property owners. We have their attorneys here, Lynn Tavener, who is the liquidator trustee that has been named now by the estate and heirs to the property, as well as Don Schultz, who is also, I believe, an attorney for the family of the people who own this property. But the partners that used to make up Seabreeze Associates have all passed, and that led to a very challenging legal issue of trying to unravel that. And again, they can speak more to that if they wish to, and again, as I said, they are here to speak as well. But at this point now, our desire is to see how we can address this property, and we now have somebody who's been given the authority to make some decisions on the property, including whether it be sale or remedy of the issues on the property, or some sort of disposition of the property as a whole, which from our perspective, we are glad to finally have someone to speak with to start to resolve the issues that we know are on this property. So with that said, I believe, again, the property owner representation will tell you they have put it out for potential purchase, and that is where we are today. Is we then heard from somebody whose bid has been selected to actually purchase this property. They've indicated their desire of redevelopment of the property, possibly reutilizing those buildings and renovating those buildings and bringing them back to a certain level. It will not be for workforce or affordable housing, just as may have been there in the past. It still would be for multifamily dwelling use, which is really what's in our ordinance, not necessarily the type of income level of somebody who may use the property. We don't address that in our zoning ordinance at all. So with that said, when I met with this proposed purchaser of the property, he outlined all of the things that they would like to have happen on the property, including renovations, some expansion, and some other elements. That led to actually a conflict in the legal nonconforming statute, which does not allow for some of those things to occur. You cannot expand the legal nonconforming use or structures on the property beyond what is there. You can't grow it any larger. So that led to that conversation. Is it time for us to seek a rezoning or ask the proposed purchaser to seek the rezoning petition to bring this to a different zoning classification that better meets and fits and aligns with how this property is really being used of a multifamily dwelling establishment? So that's what has led to the application now before you at this point in time. As I mentioned, when we had the conversations with the proposed purchaser, part of this came about is the concern that this would become an additional round of short-term rentals being put onto the property. And they willingly came forward and extended a proffer offer, which you have in your packet as well, that they would not have short-term rentals be offered on this property. So if there are rentals, it would be of a 30-day or longer nature. So I wanted to make you aware of that as well. Again, that is up to the town council when they move forward, if they accept those proffers or not, but they are part of the public hearing process, so that everybody is aware of what they are willing to restrict the use of. And that is an important thing to note, because whether they stay in the R1 or they stay in the R3, without that proffer, by right, they have the ability to have STRs under our current zoning ordinance. As long as they meet all the conditions to have an STR, they can have that. So the proffer puts in place that they would not proceed with that. Additionally, I've provided you all of the elements from our comprehensive plan in respect to this request for rezoning. Again, really focusing on the housing objectives. We did have, as you may recall, a housing committee of the Planning Commission over the last year and a half before we amended the zoning ordinance, working on ways to change some of the housing types and characters in our zoning ordinance. And we did add a lot more diversity of housing stock in all of our various zoning districts. And so, again, that was all supported through the comprehensive plan. And so I've provided you that information as well. I've also, in our staff report, provided you what the intent is for both the R1 district and the R3 district. I'm happy to read through that in detail if you care to, but I think they are pretty self-explanatory, that the R1 really is looking at single-family dwellings on lot sizes of 5,600 square feet. And the R3 does give us that provision to have multifamily dwelling types occur in that density based upon all of the setback requirements outlined in there. One of the key issues is if we don't address the zoning text amendment that does change it, and if you also support this zoning map amendment. So say you don't approve the zoning text amendment, you don't recommend it, and council then in turn does not support the zoning text amendment, removing the 3-acre minimum of in the R3 district, this zoning map amendment may not proceed forward. That's a decision the developer and their agents will have to determine with me if they want to still proceed, because they still would be in a legal non-conforming status, because this property does not meet 3 acres. It's just under 1.4 acres, 1.45 acres, thank you. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So lastly, I know it's not quite part of this public hearing, but from the town's perspective, and if I didn't make that clear enough in the first public hearing, the zoning text amendment is not necessarily a requirement that I am seeking for Seabreeze. I really am seeking it for all the other parcels that we've identified that we know we have a flaw in our zoning ordinance that we're trying to address as well. So yes, I do want to get that fixed, and then the zoning map amendment can stand on its own to determine if it will proceed forward or not by your considerations. So that's all I have. As I mentioned, we do have representation here from the applicant for this public hearing. Just so I can do a quick introduction, just so you know who they all are, really quick. So Bill Parr and Ken Odell are representing the proposed purchaser, and they've been authorized to speak on the purchaser's behalf. Behind them is Lynn Tavener, who is the liquidator trustee, and then Don Schultz is the attorney for the family. Thank you.
Thank you. So would the applicant like to make a presentation?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for your time. Katie's covered a lot. Clearly, the important point is that these buildings are structurally sound. There are some defects that were discovered in the 2 waterfront buildings. We have an engineer's report which has been submitted to the building official, and we should have a building permit to make those repairs, which are nominal. It's under $100,000 repair to make these buildings solid. The other 2 buildings have a lot of wear and tear on them. There's a lot of upkeep that's way behind, and so they need a lot. They'll need plumbing and electric and windows and doors. So there's a lot of upgrading that they need, but the buildings are solid. There's 30,000 square feet of brick veneer buildings there that have real value. in addition to the parking lot, which has a modern stormwater management system built into it. So what we're seeking to do is improve it. As Katie has articulated, these buildings can be used as non-conforming structures today. Their non-conforming use is very much like an R3. I mean, it's multifamily, very obviously. We'd like to be able to do some improvements there. We'd like to be able to enhance the property, but we can't make changes to it as non-conforming. We need the R3 to be able to do that. And so we're here to answer questions and concerns and see what we can do to make that happen.
One question I have, when you said the ones that face the water, those are the northern?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I was walking behind there, and they are very close, pretty close to the edge or to the breaker wall. And that was a bit of a concern for me. I mean, you feel confident with that distance?
Yes, ma'am. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. As you may have noticed, there's a bunch of heavy equipment on site right now. The shoreline does not belong to the Seabreeze property. It belongs to the neighboring property. And the neighboring property is owned by the Hainsworths. And they got a permit from the VMRC to do a shoreline improvement project to stabilize it. And they've got Jim Gunn, whose yard is over on the other side of the harbor, doing the work. He's one of the Chesapeake Bay's best. And so he's been in there working for a couple of weeks. They've already repaired the shoreline behind the Seabreeze buildings. So that is no longer raggedy looking like it once was. And it's still under construction. They've got big stone to put on it, but it is, if they didn't do anything else, it's already in real solid shape. But that shoreline is not on Seabreeze, it's on the Hainsworths.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I have a question or two, Mr. Chairman. So I don't know if this would be for you, sir, or for the owners. Can you just describe for us, in some of the letters that we received from the people who live on Bay Vista Way, they characterize the planned multifamily dwellings, condos, whatever they're going to be, as luxury condos. Can you sort of just give us an idea of what the price point would be of these condos? I mean, are they, Katie had mentioned that there's not an intent that these are going to sort of address the affordable housing issue, but could you just give the commission a sense of sort of what you have in mind as to price points and the type of condos and structures that these are going to be?
Very good point. And so I can tell you that the plan is to, Plan A is to renovate all the units with the exact square footage that they have by improving them. We'll be putting bigger windows in, better windows, better doors. They'll probably all be gutted, well, they'll definitely all be gutted to the studs and rebuilt. So there'll be a brand new electric, brand new plumbing, brand new HVAC, all that stuff will be new on the inside. We don't know what else we can do, however. So some of the price point will depend on whether we can make exterior improvements and we can improve the site. And for instance, the site plan that is submitted part of the application, we show a swimming pool. Now, the original site plan showed it as a play area there on the western line off the edge of the parking lot. We had proposed that there's, I forget what the square footage is, but there's enough square footage there to meet setbacks and still have a nice small pool complex that would be used by all of the 28 owners. We don't know if we can do that unless we get R3. If we reach to assume that we would get R3 and we're able to make improvements like that and others, adding porch roofs, back doors where appropriate, we would put a gate on it and it would be gated so that the owners during the heavy traffic times in summer, they could close the gates if there was a problem with beachgoers coming in to park, that sort of thing. We would think that the because the square footage is small. So the goal is to have very high-quality units, high-quality finishes, and a lot of detailing, but within a small space. So they would probably sell at under $500,000, probably 450,000 range, something like that. Now, there are 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, and so we haven't sliced and diced it down into that. We're looking at ballparks in the moment. We still don't know what the cost of construction is going to be until we get in and get the demolition done, and until we know what site improvements can be made and what other additional things can be done. We don't know what will add to those costs or to the value that gets created by it. So it's a little preliminary, but we think it's something a little over 400,000.
Thank you. And can you tell me about what the parking situation will look like? Once
the
these in your plan.
So there, I forget what the parking count is. I don't have that memorized, but there, the parking that's there, we can add, because they have handicap spaces that are not required in a condominium format. So we will be able to eliminate those, and we'll get a couple, I think we get 7 more parking spaces by eliminating some of the periphery stuff and making use of all of the asphalt. We also would be moving the dumpster out of the middle of the parking lot and sheltering that. And so, or maybe even doing away with it and having a different arrangement for trash pickup. We haven't gotten that far. But there should be adequate parking for on-site for all of the proposed use.
Okay. Okay. So then my next question is, and I'd like to just sort of, if you could just give me some background or dive into the first item in your proffer, or the first proffer, which is to proffer that none of the units will be used as short-term rentals.
Yes, sir.
As you know, it's been a big issue in the town, and I think one of the thornier sub-issues with short-term rentals has been parking, and the parking impacts on full-time residents. So you've just told us that the parking should be adequate for, all of the people who are going to be there, be they people who are there for 10 months and then leave for 2 months to short-term rent it, or if they're there year-round. So just help me understand why the decision to offer this proffer to not allow any of these units to be used for short-term rentals.
Well, in speaking with staff and the town staff, it was determined that there's a lot of consternation about short-term rentals. We looked at it and decided that we don't think the buyers of these units are going to want to have that type of activity there. It's a little tight. And so in order to accommodate the concerns of the town that they raised, we volunteered the proffer. Now, it's a costly proffer because we think that there'll be some buyers who would like very much to be able to have the cash flow and the income from doing a short-term rental and still being able to use the units. But we're willing to sacrifice that, and we think that we'll have a better quality product as a result.
So 2 points to that. I mean, you're right. This has been an issue that's raised a lot of consternation, and we've put out surveys on this issue. The plurality of people who respond to those surveys support the short-term renters who come here, the tourists who come here in the summer, and support our local economy. We had an election where 3 people who got elected were in favor of short-term rentals. So I think on balance, you'll find general support for short-term rentals, A. And then B, and look, I'm admittedly not familiar with financing, construction, any of the very technical and sophisticated work that you guys do. But to your point about cost, we also have a lot of people who come here who, as you said, buy units, and they support their income, their retirement income. A lot of them are elderly or in retirement. I'm in retirement, I don't consider myself elderly, but maybe I am, I just don't know it. And so it was just confusing to me, like when I read that, my first thought was, why would a developer offer a proffer, a voluntary proffer, that could actually reduce or limit the ability to sell the unit or to resell the unit, particularly since the proffer would carry with the property if the property was ever sold. So why would you do that?
Well, you're right, it is a permanent restriction, and it will run with the land and all the units. It will not change unless the town would take some action to waive it. Now, you could reject the proffer if you wanted to. If your commission saw fit that you wanted to encourage short-term rentals, and you saw fit to allow us to keep that, then you can hand us that proffer back, we'll take it, and we'll make business decisions later about the sensibility of allowing it or not. But we felt like that on balance, it was a fair trade to make the proffer limiting short-term rentals in exchange for being able to get a smooth transition to an R3, which would allow the property to advance.
I don't have a question, but 230 and 300 Mason are under the same restriction, so there are no rentals under 30 days. I know because we used to have a unit on 230 Mason. I don't think it's restricted sales or purchases of those units.
Okay.
But those can be placed either by the town or they can actually be placed by the developer themselves.
Those were restrictions from the developer as well on 230 and 300.
Yeah, I'm concerned with the precedent this is setting, frankly. We have a zoning ordinance that we spent a lot of time on, and as Katie mentioned, an accessory use is a short-term rental. And I'm concerned that what wasn't able to be codified during those discussions and during those meetings is now trying to be achieved administratively, which is kind of the road that I see this going down, contrary to the surveys that we've sent out and the elections that we've had. So that's what bothers me about this, because I can see this happening again. Every time a developer comes, there's going to be this sort of, not requirement, but a request, because of course under Virginia law you cannot require an unreasonable proffer as a condition of approving the permit. And that's frankly my concern.
So today, those units are apartments.
Yes,
In the future, those units are condominiums.
yes.
So when I read in R1 zoning, and maybe Katie's going to help answer this for you on this, condominiums are allowed within the R1 zoning.
They are.
So what prevents you from saying that these are condominiums as you upgrade them and then be able to work under the current R1 zoning? I'm not exactly sure why I see R3 if you're building condominiums. If you're building townhouses, that would be a different story. But I'm struggling when I read through this, why a transfer from an apartment, which was legacy and would not be allowed, to a condominium, which is allowed under my reading of the zoning, but I may be missing a nuance, requires this rezoning request at all.
Well, I'll take a...
Let me answer this
Okay,
one.
good.
Let
You
me
go
answer
ahead.
this one. This is zoning. From your zoning ordinance, it's a density issue. Under your R1, yes, you can have condos in multifamily housing in terms of like a duplex. I'm going to pick on that for a minute. We do allow that in the R1 zoning today, but it's on a certain size lot, 5,600 square feet. As this stands today, it is 28 units on 1.45 acres. It does not meet the density requirement to have that much density there under the R1. So that's first question relative to that. The second is they are seeking improvements to those buildings, which would not be allowed to occur under the R1 zoning because they are legal non-conforming uses, because they don't meet the underlying density requirements.
So it's the density challenge, and so 5,600 square feet, that means you could have 16, so they could have about 24 on that piece of
I
property.
won't say they can have 24, because they also have to meet the front yard setback, which they have to have 40 feet of frontage on a public street.
So it have to be completely rearranged and done differently.
That's correct.
So I was struggling with that when I
Yes.
read through that, and I missed that nuance there.
Yes.
So thank you, and sorry for the...
No, no problem.
Is there any expansion potential, like there are 28 units now, and that's your plan is to stick with 28? And like, what
we-
assurances does the town have that it doesn't go beyond that, or?
Well, we'll run out of room is the first answer to that, with the exception of the laundry building, the laundry office storage building, which is in a beautiful location. And so one of the things that we'll be looking at is the practicality of going 2.5 stories with that building and maybe putting 2 units there.
That's the one as you come in, it's on your left.
Yes, ma'am.
Facing the-
We still, that's not in the plan in the moment. It's a wish list item that once we get into it, assuming that the R3 comes through, then we'll be looking at a lot of other practical considerations about whether or not that makes sense. But we'll want to do something that adds more value for the town with that building than what it is now. But otherwise, there's nowhere to go. And there will be arguments in favor of reducing the density, where there's a debate among the development team now about will it make sense to cut the units in half and go with 2-story townhouse design to double the square footage because they would be more valuable, and or a mixture of some doubled units and some original units, so that there's a variety of price points in there, because you'd have to double the price if you double the unit. So, like for instance, if we were to do something with the laundry building, we'd add 2 units, we'd need some more parking, so we'd have to cut a couple of units from one of the other buildings. So we maybe combine some units to reduce the density in those buildings to move that density over to the laundry building, because it's a great location and we think we could do something nice with it. But it's theoretical in the moment. There's no hard plan for it.
Anything, any other comments?
Well, I also have some of the concerns with the short-term rental offer, but my sense is the way what you're thinking of the design is that these are condominiums on the bay. You can't get a much more beautiful view anywhere around. So I think you're seeing these as pretty luxurious condominiums being built out of the frames that exist.
Mhm.
And that maybe these people would not be, they're not going to have to worry about renting them out. They're looking at them as permanent retirement, or, I mean, this is my sense, is because I do have some concerns about that, just making that part of the deal.
Right. And we can't guess the market. It's, obviously, it's evolving constantly along with the national economy at this point. So we don't know where that will go. But we do think that if we stick with the 28 original units and has the most modest price that we can put on them, that there will be many people who will buy them for cash and have the luxury of not having to rent them to support them. Because there's no other price point like it in the town with a view like that and in a great location.
Yeah, Clayton, I just wanted to clarify too. I mean, I guess it's not just like someone like yourself, sir, who would come in. I mean, if there was just a family who wanted to expand their home, right, or was looking for some type of approval for the town. I mean, my concern is that the STR issue could just be thrown in their face. Sure, we'll grant you the permit as long as you proffer not to ever use it for an STR. Right. It's not just developers, right? I mean, no?
Proffers are only a functionality for rezoning from one zoning district to another zoning district. So your example that you just provided is saying we would deny somebody to expand a single-family home in, say, in the R1
Okay.
district, and say the only way you'll get that building permit or zoning clearance
Okay.
is if you proffer.
Well-
They're not rezoning.
Well, what about in the R3 districts that we're just rezoning now today? So that would never happen?
No.
If we approve this redesignation, because there are other properties that would be rezoned R3, right?
Right, but
So that would never happen to those guys?
that, the zoning text amendment stands by itself.
I'm asking you, Katie. I'm not
And,
trying to be
the
argumentative.
proffer-
I'm just making sure.
The proffer only sits with the parcel in question for a zoning map amendment.
Thank you.
Yes.
So if people who have their land rezoned R3, and they want to put a duplex on it, let's say, right?
Okay.
Okay, so would they, proffers wouldn't be, well, so proffer wouldn't be appropriate in that situation because we're not talking about a rezoning issue?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So
Thank you.
I just want to make everybody clear that proffers, one, they're always voluntary. That's, I know you stressed that point. They are always voluntary, and they only can come about through a rezoning application before the town. That's it.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, Mr. Hosey.
I'd like to address the point that that somehow staff is pressuring proffers to achieve a particular agenda, which is inappropriate and not true. We have just gone through a very contentious year talking about STRs, and our new ordinance is still very new. And when a developer comes to us and they want to get something done, it's our job is to try to help make it happen. If try to give them the options and make it happen. Not knowing how things are going to play out in this new STR world, because it's still all new, it was better to have an option than not. If this room had been full of people anti-STRs, well, they've got an answer, okay? And then they can move forward. It was providing them with an option to help the development continue. You don't have to do it. If you or the council doesn't want it, you reject it. It's an option. The other issue, and you brought it up, that we didn't get to address in the STR ordinance was parking. And while you heard from the developer that for permanent residents or long-term rentals, there would be sufficient on-site parking, and that's true. STRs, though, generally have a greater parking requirement because a 1 or 2 bedroom house could have multiple people showing up at that same time, all in different cars. So where the current design can handle all the parking on site, if STRs were permitted there, odds are parking is going to spill out onto Washington Avenue. That's just likely. So again, it's just an option. So depending on how this commission feels, depending on how the council feels, depending on how the public feels, it gives them the ability to pivot and move forward. And so we're trying to help them accomplish their goal. We're not trying to subvert a particular agenda.
Well, I appreciate that clarification, John, and I was building upon Katie's comments and the developer's comments when they said, in discussions with the town, we had thought that this proffer would be appropriate. And all I was simply doing was asking questions and delving into finding out the background of those conversations. I didn't bring that up. They did, okay?
That's the background.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say one statement is, I think you're trying to appeal to the market. And I know that when we bought our unit at 230 Mason, that was part of what attracted us to it, was that we wouldn't have to worry about a bunch of short-term rentals around our unit because it is such tight living. It was an attractive thing to us. So if you've done your market research and you think that's attractive, I think that's in their purview to try to attract, the kind of people that will buy those units. So, and it's hard. Even those units, they face a lot of struggle with parking. That's because people want to park in that parking lot for parades and all the other things that happen. So.
That's absolutely understood, and we heard from testimony, we heard from the developer, who, and I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth or misconstruing what you're saying, sir, but he said yes, there's definitely a cost involved, and this could potentially be money out of our pocket, okay? So there is a market out there, right? This does come at a cost to the developer.
Yep.
He said there was adequate parking, and look, this is an incredibly thorny issue. We have a bunch of letters here from people on Bay Vista Way who I'm sure would love this proffer. They're against the redesignation in the first place. I mean, all of the 3 people who live in that area right there. And if you drive by, I can understand why. So I guess that's another question. Like, how do you address those concerns of those families who live in those very nice homes next to those, you know, and they're dealing with this uncertainty now about, you know, what's going to be next to them, what's it going to look like? They're planning on retiring here.
She entered into the public hearing record, they haven't
Yeah,
yet,
yeah,
so I'm going to have you wait to answer that question until rebuttal.
Oh, okay.
Any other discussion, comments? Okay, at this time, we will open up the public comment portion of the hearing. We had one sign in. Mr. Alpin, do you want to?
Forgive me, the pen was coming out of, the ink was out of my pen. And thank you very much again. Again, I restate, my wife Elizabeth and I own the house at 3 Bay Vista in the Bay Vista Planned Unit Development in Cape Charles, Virginia. First of all, as we just heard, there is no plan. Second of all, on the March 20th agenda, for the consideration of the ZTA, the first sentence issued by Katie Nunez and signed by John Hosey states, as a result of conversations with a prospective purchaser of the Seabreeze Apartments property, which is just under a 1.5 acre parcel that is currently zoned residential 1, I have been reviewing the zoning ordinance, et cetera, et cetera. So I call that out. In 1992, and again twice last fall, the Cape Charles zoning rules were ratified requiring R3 parcels to sit on no less than 3 acres of land to avoid overcrowding and resource constraints. The Seabreeze Apartments is on 1.5 acres and was built in the early 80s. The drafters of the 1992 zoning map zoned the property R1, knowing at the time that the property was not in compliance with single-family housing R1 zoning. It must have been the case that they saw a moment in time when the town would want to reclaim the property and develop it in compliance with R1 codes, historic district guidelines, and Chesapeake Bay Protection Act setbacks. And now is that time. Over the years, the Seabreeze buildings in no way received the maintenance required of waterfront property, and as a result, they arrived at the unsalvageable condition they are in. They are vermin infested with birds flying in and out of the rafters. The residents poured things from their kitchen windows, I can only suspect, because the drains don't work. On Labor Day weekend 2023, one of the Seabreeze buildings was on fire 12 feet from my house. If anybody read my note in the paper, I remeasured it. Look at the property, well, up until this week, if you looked at the property from the Kings Creek Channel, you will see that the rear retaining wall was falling into the bay. That particular building was nearly condemned in 2013 after Hurricane Sandy almost took out the north-facing wall. I had video of men in orange hazmat suits randomly going in and out of those buildings. The conditions of the Seabreeze buildings were so bad that upon inspection in February of 2024, the residents were evacuated. The fixing and flipping of the Seabreeze Apartments is an abomination that will benefit the builder only. The town planners in 1992 and twice last fall intended the property to ultimately be developed as an R1 parcel, not a low-income apartment building retrofitted for gullible rich advantage takers. Will these advantage takers have sufficient critical eye to recognize that the builder is merely polishing up the dilapidated condemned facility? Where there's smoke, there's fire. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have some written comments that need to be read in.
So the first one's from Aaron and Don Sedgley. To whom it may concern, this letter is to be read at the April 10th, 2025 Cape Charles Planning Commission meeting. As property owners on Bay Vista's Aaron and Don Segley, we are vehemently opposed to the following. Proposed rezoning of 201 through 209 Washington Avenue from residential R1 to residential R3, being non-compliant against rezoning property. Altering town R3 parameters, vote against resolution of intent 2025-0320A. The R3 requirements of minimum 3 acres for inhabitants of the property and surrounding properties are very appropriate and should remain. 3 acres is adequate for this purpose. Inhabitation of the existing apartments on this property. Previous town elders were wise and thoughtful when they rezoned the Seabreeze property at 201 through 209 Washington Avenue to R1. They used great thought in establishing overall R3 town land usage limits as well. It is highly recommended that the Municipal Corporation of Cape Charles channel that same wisdom and uphold the current zoning requirements. Have appropriate residential units developed on these parcels under the existing R1 and existing town R3 restrictions remain as they stand. Most people at this meeting are homeowners who understand the need for regular and preventative maintenance. Some also understand that a property can get to the point of no return. This is the case here. The thought of building reuse is preposterous. Don, having worked for Gensler, a global architecture design firm, part of his role was to determine if a proposed space and parcel were viable, i.e. codes, traffic flow, existing conditions, etc., for a proposed use. The situation at 201 through 209 Washington Avenue is worse than we all are aware. These apartments are not suitable to inhabit, and the parcel is not and should not be rezoned for reuse. They need to be demolished and the property reestablished within appropriate existing zoning regulations. These buildings have been a health hazard and an eyesore to this town since owner neglect began many years ago. It was an injustice to have the residents in them as long as they did. To appropriately retrofit would not be cost effective, besides 8-foot ceilings are not appropriate to luxury living. Previous Seabreeze residents reported that they lived in aberrant conditions and non-existent engagement of the management company. Issues include plumbing, electrical, foundational, mechanical, roofing, and structural. Building 3 is in serious structural jeopardy, appearing to be sinking into the bay. This is another example of property disregard and deterioration. As an aside, we miss seeing and chatting with the previous Seabreeze residents and look to welcome them back. We are in favor of Cape Charles supporting the development. Next letter is from Devin and Linda Johnson from 2 Bay Vista Way. Dear Ms. Nunez, my wife and I are opposed to rezoning application from Seabreeze Associates LP from Residential 1 R1 to Residential 3 R3. My wife and I are against changing the current zoning, which will affect the town's comprehensive plan for this non-conforming property. Why should this property be the change agent for the town zoning comprehensive plan? The 8 parcels cited whose zoning will be affected will not have the same effect on the town historic character and the residents that live in the Washington Street corridor. The town now has the opportunity to have this non-conforming property developed within the current zoning ordinance and in a manner that is representative of housing within town. Look at what is being built and renovated on Washington Avenue. As far as the town's affordable housing and added units issue, yes, if this rezoning is approved, it will add back units. However, affordability will not be addressed. Look at what 1-bedroom condos are being listed for in Cape Charles. I truly believe that by changing this zoning, it will have unintended consequences for the town and all property owners. The current zoning has benefited everyone, and this property should not be used as the foundation to change it. Sincerely, Devin and Linda Johnson. Next letter is from Drs. Fabian and Sashi Bakshi from 4 Bay Vista Way. We purchased our home at Bay Vista Way in 2018 as a vacation home, and we plan to eventually retire there. We fell in love with the quiet and historic town of Cape Charles with well-developed zoning plans and controlled growth to preserve the town's character. We're not fans of busy beach towns, as our too busy daily lives leaves us yearning for a quiet getaway location, which Cape Charles provides. Our first point is the above 2 proposals appear to be intimately linked but have quite different consequences and should be decoupled. The removal of the R3 3-acre minimum has long-term implications for the development of the entire town and should not be pushed through to facilitate the singular Seabreeze application, as appears to be in this case. We would recommend tabling the R3 3-acre minimum and reviewing it as a separate issue after the Seabreeze application has been considered. This approach ensures that the matter is evaluated as a long-term issue impacting the entire town, thereby eliminating any perception that decisions are being made exclusively to favor the Seabreeze application. If the proposal is still, however, considered, then we would like to register our objection to the removal of this clause. Regarding the Seabreeze application, firstly, we would like to acknowledge that most of us purchased our homes with the multifamily dwelling in existence. While it obviously was an outlier as far as structure and use, we certainly understood that it served as an important social purpose and had no issues with the community or the residents. This, however, is significantly different from a developer trying to flip the structure to make a profit, leaving us, the neighbors, to live with it. An argument that we have been living with Seabreeze for so long that we can just continue with a similar structure, in our opinion, leaves us closed-minded as to what could be rather than what is. The Seabreeze property is prime bayfront property, and we should be prepared otherwise, and we should not pretend otherwise. The fact that the town planners made this property R1 even though it already had an R3 structure in its place speaks volume as to their long-term intent for the neighborhood. The intent of this basic zoning district is to provide quiet, medium-density, single-family residential development, plus provide open areas where similar residential development appears likely to occur. This is compared to R3, which allows for high-density housing, including limited commercial activity. We would also like to address the overall housing issues that have been raised, outlining the need for diverse and affordable housing. This property, as previously mentioned, is prime bayfront property and should not be used to provide affordable housing. There is no shortage of land around Cape Charles that can be used for this purpose. The town will be better served by keeping the waterfront developed in the manner that it is currently with R1 housing. Flipping an old, dilapidated, previously condemned structure and giving it a facelift will not provide long-term benefit for Cape Charles, but only short-term benefit for investors, leaving us to live with it for years to come. Additionally, we have not heard the 100-foot Chesapeake Bay setback addressed. The final one is from John Payne. Planning Commission members and staff, I would like to introduce myself, John, and my wife Antoinette as the landowners of Lot 0 Bay Vista Way. We have owned this lot for 6 years with plans to build our house on the lot. We have recently had a site plan prepared by MAS of Virginia Beach and are moving closer to construction of our home. When we bought the property, we were aware of Seabreeze as an attainable housing development and had no issue with the development. As lot owners, we are aware of the many changes forcing this property to not be habitable. Since this property is in transition in ownership and use, it is our opinion it should not be changed from R1 zoning to R3. We believe it is zoned appropriately in this category, consistent with adjoining properties, including Dreams by the Water. The R3 zone stated in the ordinance, it is to provide high-density multifamily development. The intent of the R1 zone is to provide quiet, medium-density, single-family. The regulations are designed to stabilize and protect the essential characteristics of the district. To rezone this property to R3, in my opinion, would be arbitrary and and inconsistent with the current future land use of the latest adopted comprehensive plan. It is also my read, subject to correction, that rezoning R3 would not allow the existing property to meet current required setbacks of the R3 zone. Because of this has been a non-conforming use, I believe it does not guarantee redevelopment of the property in R3. We do not believe that reducing the minimum required acreage of R3 from 3 to 2 acres minimum is a better balance of the needs of the town and its future multifamily development needs. We therefore recommend as directly adjacent property owners the denial of the elimination of the minimum acreage requirement for R3 and recommend denial of the rezoning of Seabreeze to R3. We believe maintaining the current zoning would be consistent with character of the town, in particular Washington Street, and the land use pattern in the comprehensive plan. We thank you for your consideration of our thoughts and expectations in your deliberations.
Does any commissioners have any further discussion with the applicant?
And the applicant has a chance to rebuttal with any of the comments.
Yeah.
Are there public comments closed, or can I?
The first public comments are closed, and the only one that was written down was Mr. Alpert, so. Would you like to rebut any of those comments?
Well, Seabreeze has a bad history. We understand that. There, you know, from management situations and tenant situations, we know that there are a lot of issues there, and perhaps they are vermin-infested buildings with birds living in the rafters in the moment. That won't be for long. Those things will be corrected and not happen again. And, you know, with all due respect to the gentleman that spoke and the other folks that live at or have property at Bay Vista, when they bought their property, they saw that there was a multifamily property next door, and they bought their homes, and hopefully they were advised by someone, an agent or somebody, about the fact that there was, at that time, low-income housing. All I can say, you know, with due respect to them, is that what we're going to do is going to be far superior to what it was when they made their purchase. And we will do everything we can to make it a good neighbor. But it was obviously there when they bought their homes. And, you know, we'll do everything we can to improve the situation for them and make this a good neighborhood. That's our goal.
Thank you.
Katie, can I ask you a couple questions? Is Seabreeze within the historic district?
No. No, it is not within the historic district.
So doesn't it have to adhere to those guidelines?
No, it does have to adhere to the other developmental standards and regulations that we do have in our zoning ordinance. For any of the other residential districts that fall outside of the historic district, we do have some standards they have to adhere to, yes.
And also, as they go along, if this is passed, if there's changes that they've got to make, they still have to come before the town, either us in constructing or reconstructing.
It won't come before the planning commission, it will come before the town staff for review of a site plan. They would have to comply with all the elements composed of the site plan. I do want to address, the existing buildings can stay where they are. They do not have to be moved to address and meet setback requirements. Those buildings, as long as they wish to renovate them, can stay in that footprint, and therefore they do not have to adhere to the setback requirements at that point. Any new structures being proposed will have to adhere and comply with the setback requirements. Any amenities being offered, they'd have to meet parking requirements. We have talked about all of those issues with Mr. Parr so that they understand what would be expected in the submission of a site plan to us. Everything from trash management to, yes, stormwater, parking requirements, sidewalk requirements, landscaping, lighting. We've talked about all of those things. I do want to touch base, because it got mentioned this evening, the Chesapeake Bay Act. It actually does not fall in the bulk of this property, because it is more than 100 feet from the RPA line, which, for those who know that, is the resource protection area of the Chesapeake Bay Act, and that is judged and measured from the average mean high water mark. And you go 100 feet from that average mean high water mark onto the land, and that's the end of the RPA, of what is called the landward and seaward of the RPA 100-foot buffer. So the bulk of this property sits outside of that. Definitely, yes, on the northern end, which is the backside of the two buildings that were deemed unfit. RPA measurement does touch upon that property. Again, we'd have to go remeasure, because it's always based upon the measurement at that time, and I've already mentioned that to Mr. Parr, that will have to be part of the site plan submission. And I've already been in touch with DEQ on this parcel as well. There are exceptions allowed in the RPA for any lot that was established before the Chesapeake Bay came into existence, which, again, the Chesapeake Bay Act is a federal law. It didn't come into existence, I'm going to get this wrong. It was like 89, 87 or 89. I wish I had the number in front of me, I don't. But it took then, which is how I know this, that's what triggered the town to finally get zoning, is the Chesapeake Bay Act coming into being from the federal law that moved down to the state to enforce implementation of that. In turn, the state then required all of those classified in the Chesapeake Bay watershed had to adopt certain elements to meet compliance with the Chesapeake Bay Act. Everything from designating the zoning areas and the map of the affected parcels that are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed area. Resource protection areas had to be defined, resource management areas, which is another tier to the Chesapeake Bay Act, intensely developed areas that were already happening in communities before the Bay Act ever came into existence had to be mapped and identified. Zoning had to come into place, stormwater had to happen at that same time, erosion and sediment control also had to happen all at that same time. But the Bay Act also put into place, well, things were already happening before the Bay Act ever came along, and so they built in exceptions and exemptions to allow continued development that was already pre-existing before the Bay Act. So
Katie, to clarify, either 207 or 209 would not meet the rear setbacks today?
they do, that's correct, they would not have to adhere, because
No,
they are
but
existing.
would they meet them today?
I'd have to look at their survey, but no, I don't think they would meet those requirements, no.
And at least one of those buildings would fall within the 100 feet today, the last time measured, of the Chesapeake Bay.
And when I say it would meet, it's like just the back end of the building. It's not even like encompassing the entire structure itself. But
there's
yeah,
a foot or two of it at least
Yeah.
that would cross into that area.
yes.
Okay.
And just to be clear, for the public's knowledge, whether we rezone this or not as a town, they still have the ability to refurbish 28 units.
In the R1 district, all those legal non-conforming uses could continue as long as they met the calendar that's associated with it, which is why I went over that clock with you at the very beginning. So yes, some uses could expire if they aren't restored under those clocks that are ticking on the 4 buildings. Yes.
And one last question along those lines. Can they convert them to condominiums and sell condominiums, or do they, with their existing structure as apartments, do they have to stay as apartments?
Condominiums are in the Code of Virginia are just a type of home ownership. So you cannot say you can have a single-family home or say a duplex is probably more appropriate, a duplex, but not allow them to be condo-wise. You absolutely can allow them to be condo-wise. They're just a form of ownership. That's all they are. And same thing with this property. It would just be a form of ownership for those apartments. Yeah.
Thank you. So, do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? All right. We have no unfinished business. New business. 7A. Zoning text amendment, ZTA 2025-01, application from the town of Cape Charles to amend Article 3, Section 3.3, Bow Legs E, the Cape Charles zoning ordinance by...
Oh, my God.
No, I'm fine. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going out. Thank you. Wow.
I'll restart. Zoning text amendment, ZTA 2025-01, application from the town of Cape Charles to amend Article 3, Section 3.3, Bow Legs E of the Cape Charles zoning ordinance by deleting the provision requiring a 3-acre lot minimum for a multifamily project development. Discussion.
Are we currently challenged in that we changed the zoning map and put 7 parcels, I think, out of 8 that do not meet the requirements as R3? Do we need to revisit that? If we were not to approve this, would we need to go revisit that map and change those back? I mean, we currently have a map that says they're R3, but they don't meet R3.
You actually can't change them back because we eliminated the RE district, the residential estates district that they had been zoned to. So we would have to address this one way or another. And this is the solution we've come to. So you could potentially establish a lower threshold of saying, okay, not totally eliminating the 3 acre minimum.
Going to 1 acre, which is
I think
the
it's,
smallest.
which is the smallest at 1 acre. So that would be the way to address that. As it stands right now, nobody is in danger in those 8 parcels because no development has happened since you adopted the zoning ordinance in December 19th of 2024. So,
And are any of those properties ones that we're considering for town projects for affordable housing?
I won't say town projects, definitely the town parcel is in that consideration, but that's a 16 acre parcel. So it is not in any danger per se, but again, you may know further of this being on the town council, where the town council sits in any conversations or deliberations of trying to move a project forward with the town pushing
Is
that.
that the Keckwell property?
Yeah. Minus the Keck well now, but
Right.
yes.
I mean, I'm personally uncomfortable with no limit. You know, saying that you could, do this on a 5,600 square foot lot or et cetera. So I'm uncomfortable moving it to nothing. I think there ought to be a limit. I just don't know, I'm torn, should it stay at 3 or should we rectify our error and make it 1? But that's where I have not made a decision yet, but that's where my head is sitting now, and I'm trying to solve that issue.
What are Bay Lake condominiums? How many units are there? Do you have any idea? Yeah.
Sorry. Say that again?
On Washington.
On Washington, I want to say, because it's 2 stories, so it's, I hate doing this without knowing exactly. It could be 14, but I'm not positive on that number, so don't hold me to it. Again, there was that development, I only know a little bit about it. It was several parcels that came together to form that. I don't know if that required, and maybe somebody with longer history with the town would know if that required going through conditional use permit or any other special permit that was issued by the town to get to that development occurring there. So, but there was, I want to say there was 7 lots that came together to form that parcel eventually. So.
I mean, to your point, Ian, it's hard to throw out acreage without kind of some type of reference point for what's reasonable on a particular size lot.
Well, on here, I'm just rereading the notes here. For a multifamily project developed in addition to the above regulations, it says minimum lot size, lot area per dwelling is 1,500 square feet. So is that providing some sort of that's providing a limit? I mean, is that what?
That's 29 an acre. If you take 1,500 a square foot and call it 4,400, you're at 29 units per acre.
But then you
But
also.
gotta have parking and all.
Right, you got to
those
start
other
factoring in everything else that starts to eat away at that lot usage, including the setback requirements, and then, yes, it's going to be a driveway, it's going to be sidewalk, it could be those other elements, stormwater has to be resolved on the property. There are all those things that will start to eat away at your developable area.
So the areas that are the 8 parcels that are zoned R1 within the town, R3 within the town, are all over 1 acre. And the lots in question are over 1 acre combined, 1.4, 1.45.
4.5, yes.
So, any further discussion, questions? Somebody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion. I'd like to table this topic until the town staff comes back and gives us other options to address how to resolve the map and see if there are any other issues that could potentially solve the 8 units or the 7 units that we've created as R3 but do not fit those requirements. So I'd like to understand what are all our options before we do that. So that would be my motion.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to have the town staff come back and about the 7 properties that are currently R3 and what,
And do not meet and is this our only option to rectify that? Or is there other approaches that could be done?
discussion?
I'd like to see a minimum amount here too. For a multi-family project development, what is the absolute minimum?
The minimum what?
Acreage. What is the minimum acreage? Like for instance, what we've done on Washington Avenue for those, I think you're right, it's 14 units. What is that? What is that acreage that sits on? And do we have any feedback that there's adequate acreage for the parking, et cetera? In which case, we were talking about double that for what would be needed for what was the Seabreeze apartment area.
It's hard to do that because there's different height restrictions based on where you are, correct?
No, it's 40 feet across the R1 zoning district is the height.
Even where like Heckwell is, that would be the same thing? Okay.
I'm trying to see if I can pull up the map to give you an answer on the current acreage of the Washington Avenue development.
So you thought it was 7 lots, basically?
It's Washington and Nectarine.
I think it is, yeah.
It's .4. If it's the 4 lots. Yeah, it has to be those.
Yes.
If I could speak to the motion. One of the reasons staff is comfortable with removing the entire requirement is because of all the other requirements. So it gives the flexibility to take this type of zoning and use it however it makes sense for whatever size lot it is. So when you look at all the setbacks, when you look at the parking, when you look at the storm drain, when you look at all of those things, as Katie tried to say a moment ago, it's going to eat it down to what makes sense for that property. Putting an arbitrary acreage in there doesn't really get you anywhere. You're still required to meet all the other requirements. So that, and to come up with the alternatives, well, the alternatives would be rezoning. We'd have to rezone it in another way. So either we rezone it to some whole new zoning district and have new zoning requirements that go with it, or we set it at a minimum acreage, which meets the minimum lot size we have. I mean, those would be the types of options you would be looking at. And this goes on the bottom of our priority list. We've already got a list that's this long. So you put this on our desk, we'll do it. But there's no telling when it's coming back to you. It'll work its way up when we get all of our other work done. And in the meantime, if this doesn't move forward, the Second Amendment can't move forward because they can't rezone to R3 because they don't meet the requirements. So this essentially just tables the entire project.
Katie, it looks like it's 12 units on less than half an acre.
Actually, it's a total of 16 lots that are over there that make up the Washington Avenue development, the Bay Lake,
Bay Lake condominium.
Thank you, Bay Lake condominium. I can't pull up, sorry, I'm off phone, I can't get to the acreage under the assessor's information right now, it's just not working on my phone.
Could you get her on one of our computers?
That's okay.
Well, I mean,
So-
to John's
so-
point, it still has to adhere to other requirements.
It does.
Yes.
So in a way, it's kind of irrelevant. I understand what you're saying there.
And I think one of the things that we continue to hear from developers when we're talking about what it would take to have housing constructed in this community that could be more affordable. Definitely the cost of housing itself is driving it and trying to remove some of the impediments associated with it. So I think versus trying to lump everything onto one piece of property to be the solution is probably not just the only thing we should be examining. And that's why the removal of the acreage requirement does give some of those parcels, like I've mentioned over on Old Cape Charles Road, that could accommodate maybe similar to what else is also on Old Cape Charles Road, buildings that would have 4 apartments in them. It's one building with 4 apartments. Or you put 2 of those buildings on there, it could be 8 apartments versus trying to cram 60 apartments somewhere because it's a larger piece of property. So to try and break out some of the housing costs and maybe into smaller paired buildings, I think are things we should be considering and offering that opportunity and not just saying, we're looking for one big massive apartment complex to come in here, so.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second on the table, so. You ready for the vote?
Yep.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All in opposed say nay.
Nay.
Okay, nays have it. Anybody else have a motion they'd like to put on?
I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to town council that they move forward with their review of removing the requirement for 3 acres on R3 plots.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor for removing the 3-acre lot minimum for multifamily developments. And a second. Any further discussion? Okay, have the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
You opposed? Okay. Motion carries. All right. Item 7B, zoning map amendment, EMA 2025-01, application for Seabreeze Associates LP to conditionally rezone with proffers 201 through 209 Washington Avenue, tax map number 83A1-3 B2 and 83A1-3-3 from residential 1 R1 to residential 3 R3 pursuant to Cape Charles zoning ordinance section 2.7.2 and section 3.3. Discussion. No discussion?
I will say that I'm definitely sympathetic to whenever people who are stakeholders in Cape Charles come to meetings like this and express their emotions and feelings about things like this, so I appreciate you all doing that. I feel very conflicted in a lot of the things, the comments that were submitted, because they're kind of coming at you from all angles and it's a little bit contradictory in some ways. I mean, some were saying they didn't want the thing there because people are, you know, abusing the privilege of where they live, and to me, I mean, I've been aware of that place for a long time, and it's hard for me to put the evil hat on developers for wanting to come in and try to improve upon things. No more so than I thought the developer that bought a little sliver of property in between the Coast Guard housing and Seabreeze Apartments tried to make their money by subdividing that property and deciding to build some very beautiful homes there. So you know, it's hard for me to think that this is a real bad improvement for the town. And whether or not proffers are a part of it, I guess I'm not going to be the one to get involved in that conversation right now. But you know, if there were ever a place for STRs, it would maybe be where you had parking and trash control and covenants in place of your own, in addition layered on top of town restrictions. And if the developer wants to put those conditions in place, to me, that's their decision. Anyone buying into that property would be well aware of what the conditions and restrictions are, and that they were either allowed or they were not, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to them. You know, I do feel like it may not be, it's not affordable housing, it's not workforce housing, but I hope no one blames the town for that, because we don't own that property, and even the owners of that property did so at one point in time in the 80s to make money themselves. Because HUD housing is an investment that people make, not just to be nice people. So, again, that goes back to my not liking to vilify people for how they decide to develop their property. But anyway, I'm generally in favor of that.
I have a couple, because the proffers don't bother me. I mean, if the developer wants to offer them up, I am fine with that. My concern with the property is that you've got a couple of buildings sitting right on the bay that don't meet our setback requirements, don't meet the Chesapeake Bay setback requirements, and we're gonna go rezone them so that they can, you know, make the upgrades they want around that and still do it. They could still make upgrades to those buildings as R1, and I would understand that, that's legacy, we can't go touch any of that. But we're giving them a lot more flexibility to make more changes that could affect the edge of the bay there. And so I am concerned about that piece of this rezoning. So if they wanted to go ahead and make their business case and leaving it in R1, and they can touch those buildings and still upgrade them within that footprint. But us to rezone it to make it even easier when they're right there on that edge that wouldn't be approved nowadays is a concern of mine.
So obviously I do have a problem with the first proffer. I don't think we should be in any way limiting the economic development of this town and people coming here and giving summer dollars to the town, which our businesses need to remain open year-round so we can enjoy those businesses year-round. Those dollars start going away, we're not going to be able to enjoy those businesses year-round. Alternatively, I'm loath to go behind a deal that and an arrangement and the decisions that the builder has made, which is, I'm guessing that what I'm certain is in his best interest. And to your point, Clayton, yeah, I mean this is an eyesore, and we should be encouraging redevelopment and turning eyesores into nice places for people to live. And on the flip side of the STR, I'm sure the people who live on Bella Vista Way would welcome an STR restriction to limit the number of people that are going to be in their neighborhood. I totally understand that. I would just say, and, we've heard this again and again and again, I can't think of a better place for an STR to go. When you have the parking, when you have the infrastructure, I mean, if not this place, where is sort of the question I would raise. But I think one of the things we discussed tonight during that discussion was, again, the parking issue. So I would just reiterate what I know you've heard, and I know town council has heard 100 times before. We have to find a way to address the parking issue in the town, because it's just going to keep coming back as a part of the overall discussion on the issue. But you know that. So,
Well, it will have to meet the parking criteria, correct?
yeah. But as John said, I mean, you always get the overflow from there's more people in the unit than you allot parking for. So
That's under STRs, right?
Mhm.
But-
Yes, right. The two issues are linked.
But in this particular case, I do think they said they're building a fence, right? Around the development.
To potentially protect their parking lot
Yeah.
from infiltration from, day trippers or
Right,
whatever.
right,
Yeah.
right.
If there was ever a place for overflow extra parking, it certainly is Washington Avenue again.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Further discussion? Do I have a motion?
I will make a motion to approve the application from Seabreeze Associates to conditionally rezone with proffers. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll say to rezone with proffers, 201, 209 Washington Avenue, tax map 83A1-3-B2 and 83A1-3-3 from residential R1 residential to R3 pursuant to Cape Charles zoning ordinance section 2.7.2 to section 3.2.
I'll second.
And that should be a motion to recommend to the town
Right.
council?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't cancel that.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second, to recommend to town council to approve the conditional rezoning of 201 through 209 Washington Avenue, tax map 83A1-3-B2 and 83A1-3-3 from residential R1 to residential R3 with proffers provided by the applicant. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Item 8, standing staff reports. March 2025 monthly report.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The March monthly report is in your packet. Just to go over a few items, so the Board of Zoning Appeals did have a full agenda on Tuesday. We have listed all of the hearings that were before them. I do want to give you a couple brief updates. The first application for the appeal filed by the Gentrys at 542 Jefferson was tabled by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and so that will be coming back next month. The second item of the variance application from Bay Creek Resort was approved, and the application from the Dreams by the Water subdivision was approved with some changes to the application that was submitted as a whole across all the 10 lots. Specifically, they did not approve any of the rear setback variance requests. They did approve the front setback requests for variances. And that's it. That is all my updates from the various entities I represent for you.
Thank you. Item 9, announcements. Next planning commission meeting is May 6th, 2025. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion we adjourn.
So a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you all.